Pokemon has always been known to stick with what works. Picking your starter, collecting 8 gym badges, fighting off an evil team, and battling opponents with a turn-based combat system. And while many of the fan games and ROM hacks I've showcased do a great job of shaking those elements up, there might be times where you find yourself craving a much different experience using the Pokemon IP. So in today's video, I'm here to showcase 7 very unique Pokemon fan games that switch up the classic formula, with a mix of familiar and brand new systems. So without further ado, my name is Ari, and let's get started. The first game on this list is Pokemon Auto Chess. Now, if you aren't familiar with the auto chess genre, let me explain how this game works. You'll start on a board with a handful of Pokemon, and by placing them on the field, they'll attack the enemies. Each Pokemon has an ability they can cast after attacking a certain number of times. This might deal damage, or even provide a defensive buff. You can buy more Pokemon from the shop below, and after collecting 3 of the same one, it can then evolve and increase the base damage or effectiveness of its ability. After a certain number of rounds, you can obtain items, which can increase the stats of the unit you place. And while Pokemon don't exactly level up, you yourself as a player can, allowing you to place more units on the field at a time, and increasing the shop rates of stronger ones. More importantly though, are synergies. Rather than having a type or two, your units will have synergies, and if a certain number of them are on the field at the same time, all of them will receive a buff. For example, having 2 or more normal types grants them and all nearby allies a shield when combat starts. Since battles are done automatically, the strategy and skill expression mainly comes from where you decide to place your Pokemon on the field, what type of team you decide to build, and how you distribute your items. Many of your first matches might be met with defeat in ways that you won't know how to make sense of, but it's all part of the learning experience and understanding what every Pokemon, synergy, or item does. But Pokemon Auto Chess is actually extremely easy to start playing, as you don't even need to download a client or a sizable game file. All you have to do is go to the game's website, log in with an email account, and join a quick player ranked match in the game's Open Lobbies tab. Overall, the game is pretty fun. It's one I personally found boring after a match or two, but that might just be my personal distaste for the genre as a whole. Like I said before though, it's incredibly easy to start playing, so giving it a try won't hurt at all. But if you're a fan of the Mystery Dungeon series, then you're absolutely going to love this next game, called Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Origins. First, a bit of a disclaimer that this is not a ROM hack of an existing PMD game, but instead a fan game built from the ground up. In Origins, you won't be playing as a human transformed into a Pokemon, rather just a regular explorer who's recently arrived at Guildmaster Island. Your goal will be to reach the fabled summit and earn the right to lead a guild yourself. Also, unlike the official games though, Origins has a much bigger focus on gameplay, lifting a lot of the restrictions that would normally be locked behind the main story. So you'll start off by picking a starter, choosing your team name, and venturing through various dungeons. You can befriend other Pokemon by simply throwing an apricot at them, and swap playable characters with the click of a button. Origins also introduces a ton of new changes to the battle system as well, with certain attacks now having some movement tied to them, increased range, or special restrictions to balance out their power. Exploring in this game was extremely fun, and the difficulty level never felt unfair, especially since dungeons will actually label their suggested level. Like I said at the beginning though, Origins lifts all of the restrictions normally bound to you in the official games. So from the very start, you can access the mover learner, chest opening, and even evolution. It felt like there was some actual progression tied to my Pokemon, and I wasn't just locked to the first forms of my 2 starters. With its fun gameplay changes, quality of life features, and freedom to do whatever, I can't lie when I say that Origins might be the best Mystery Dungeon experience when it comes to the gameplay. So even if you've never been a fan of the series, I highly suggest you at least go and try it. The next game is much different though, and it's called Pocket Crystal League. Like most Pokemon games, you'll choose a starter option and then go on to collect gym badges. But rather than sending out the first Pokemon in your party to battle the other, you'll instead do so with cards. Now, bear with me as I will be explaining how battles work in a sort of bullet point manner. You'll pick a berry that matches the Pokemon you want to place, and once they're on the field, you can then use them to attack. They'll deal damage equal to their attack minus the enemy's defense. And if there isn't a Pokemon on the other side, you'll then take from your opponent's hit points equal to the damage dealt. Each turn, you'll be able to draw 2 berries or 1 Pokemon. Once either side has possession of the other's hit points, the round is over and you'll receive some money. You'll constantly be playing a mix of offense and defense, preventing the enemy from freely taking your hit points, but also making sure you always have the Pokemon to respond back with. Now, onto the game's actual progression. Each time you win a battle, you'll proceed to the next level, where you can then choose to possibly level up your cards, evolve them, purchase new ones, or even just head right into the next battle. Most of them in the early game will be very easy and very short, but after a number of rounds, you'll then be able to fight against the gym leader, which is where the game begins to pick up in terms of difficulty. So instead of trying to brute force your way through every gym battle, you can instead postpone it and go through another few rounds of normal battles to strengthen your deck and unlock more options. Finally, special upgrades called glyphs can also be found as you progress through the game. They can be applied to your cards to give them unique effects, but do also increase the berry cost to place them. I personally haven't played a lot of card games, so I will say that Pocket Crystal League felt very easy to learn and was overall a quite fun experience. Moving on is Pokemon Super Eevee Edition. Now, at first glance, this game looks very simple, with a story about a new Pokemon trainer and a world constructed using the Generation 2 art style. But you'll soon realize how unique and how incredible this game really is. So let's start with the battle system, one that just by looking at it, you might immediately assume is completely turn-based. Instead, however, battles operate in real time, where Pokemon can attack once their speed meter or the yellow bar next to their name completely fills. This also means being put to sleep or paralyzed places your Pokemon on a cooldown, and speed raising or lowering moves will now change how often you can attack. Alongside that, power points have also been replaced with a stamina system, with moves costing more depending on how strong they are. To be honest, I didn't run out of stamina often, but it will become a resource you need to manage on the especially longer routes. However, that's not even this game's primary gimmick, as rather than receiving a grass, fire, or water type as your first Pokemon, you'll instead receive an Eevee that can transform into its different evolutions at any point in the game, including in battle. This gave the player a lot more strategic freedom, which felt very important and necessary since a lot of battles can be quite difficult and you can have up to 4 Pokemon on the field at a time. So as you progress through the story, you'll unlock different evolutions up to the 2nd generation. Obtaining other Pokemon though is also handled much differently. You won't be throwing Pokeballs, but instead defeating corrupted Pokemon and restoring them to their original state. Finally, the story is really interesting. I don't want to spoil too much of the plot, but it goes way further beyond the standard collect 8 gym badges and stop Team Rocket story you think that you'll be playing through. Overall, Pokemon Super Eevee Edition is a very fun and very unique game that I highly suggest playing if you're looking for a unique experience that still holds a lot of resemblance to the official formula. Up next, though, is probably one of the most visually and technically impressive fan games I've ever seen, and that's Pokemon Close Combat, a 2D fighting game with Pokemon as its playable characters. Now, I personally have never really cared for fighting games myself, but I found the gameplay to be quite enjoyable. Despite all being fighting types, the playable characters differ from each other very well. Some are going to be your very simple punch and kick fighters, while others, like Galarian and Zapdos, and especially Falinks, feel incredibly unique to play. I really have to compliment the animations as well. They do a great job of expressing the Pokemon's personality while also just looking really good. But with 19 different characters to play, you probably won't find it difficult to pick one up that matches your desired playstyle. However, close combat can actually be played in multiple ways. You can either choose to play solo, which after selecting your character, puts you up against a wave of opponents, or you can play versus, which allows you and someone else to play against each other using the same device. Don't worry though, there is also online multiplayer, so you will be able to play against friends around the globe. Overall, Close Combat is a very fun and unique game that, with its consistent updates and additions of new characters, is one I suggest keeping an eye on if you are a fan of fighting games. So if you're an older Pokemon fan, maybe at least above the age of 20, there's a good chance you've played something called Pokemon Tower Defense. It was a browser-based game where you played through the events of Kanto or Johto with a tower defense combat system. Now, although this game holds up pretty well, I wanted to showcase another one that just so happens to share the same exact name. Rather than playing through an admittedly below average story and catching new Pokemon to build your team, it instead takes a much more arcade approach. You can start by selecting a level and then a difficulty mode, as well as any extra modifiers you'd like to play with. Once in game, you can place a Pokemon on the field and they'll begin attacking. But from here is where the game gets interesting, as by clicking on a Pokemon, you can spend in-game currency to upgrade it, increasing its damage, range, or even granting access to new abilities. Alternatively, there are also EX Pokemon, who instead level up by defeating enemies and have special skills you can activate manually. By completing maps or unlocking achievements, you can purchase and acquire more Pokemon, and even trainers that can provide special buffs. One suggestion I do feel I need to make though, is a different name for the game, as it's currently extremely broad and still shares that of the older one most people are more familiar with. But overall, I definitely prefer this game over the other Pokemon Tower Defenses I've played in the past, and I highly suggest you at least keep your eye on it, as it does receive consistent updates. And last, but certainly not least, is Pokemon Reloaded. Now, for many years, this game went very much under the radar, with almost zero attention from bigger content creators or even a sizable amount of players, which kind of blows my mind, because it's incredibly fun, unique, and quite impressive for a Pokemon fan game. But thankfully, in 2024, it blew up with coverage from massive YouTubers, finally bringing it into the spotlight. Alright, but what is Pokemon Reloaded? Well, from a story and exploration viewpoint, it plays strikingly similar to the mainline games. You'll travel across a new region, collect gym badges, and stop the antagonist groups. But of course, rather than battles being turn-based, they'll be handled using a real-time combat system. Unlike the previous real-time combat game, you'll have complete control of where your Pokemon moves on the field, requiring you to actually aim your own attacks and dodge the enemies. This created a really interesting twist on the in-game meta, as Pokemon are no longer bound to their stats, and can now shine a lot brighter depending on your own skill level. However, this will also mean that you won't be able to mindlessly sweep your way through the story bosses either, since even stronger Pokemon will still require some level of skill expression. The combat is easily the highlight of this game, and is absolutely worth playing it over. However, I feel it's necessary to mention that the story and region barely offered that level of excitement. The plot was pretty bland in terms of writing, and didn't really do anything but get in the way of your adventure. Exploring the region also felt like a bit of a chore. A lot of routes just seemed way longer than they needed to be, on top of also feeling incredibly similar to each other. But like I said before, the game is still very much worth playing for the combat alone, so I highly suggest giving it a try. But that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you find yourself looking for more Pokemon fan games or ROM hacks to play after you're done with these ones, then definitely be sure to check out the other videos on my channel, and even subscribe for future ones. Thank you to my channel members for their continued support, and have a nice rest of your day.